What a delight it is to welcome you to this series with John Drescher, dealing with your child from 6 to 12. How this came about is members of our own staff at Gateway Films and Vision Video read John's book, When Your Child is 6 to 12, and were so impressed with it they said, we've got to get this material on video so it can be shared with many, many families across the country and internationally. So we approached John, and he was happy to do it. And John is the right man for this job. He's retired now, but you never know it. He still writes. He has written over 30 books. These books have been translated into over 20 languages. John himself has 5 children that he's raised and over a dozen grandchildren. And he brings a wealth of experience to understanding this time where our people felt there was just such an unusual opportunity to realize that the children between 6 to 12 are at a stage when we have opportunities to do things with them that we never will again. This is when they want to hear our stories, as John will point out so vividly. This is when they want to spend time with us. This is when they want to model their lives after ours, and that probably won't be quite the same when they reach their teenage years. So here is the great moment we can take advantage of in raising our children, and John Drescher is the man to help us see exactly how. So we welcome John, we welcome all of you who are participating, and we express our special thanks to Bill and Kathy Fretz, who have provided their home for our gathering today. Thank you.
I appreciate especially the privilege today of meeting with a group of parents who are the parents of children in middle childhood. When I speak of children from 6 to 12, I'm speaking of those that sometimes I call the missing age of childhood. I call it the missing age because really there's not much written about this age. When I wrote my little book in my research, I went to find books that are written concerning middle childhood, and basically they're absent. There's an abundance of books when it comes to early childhood. There are tons of books when it comes to the teen years. But in this age, between 6 and 12, you have very few, and the publisher as well did some research in trying to find books along this line and found it practically nil. And so I've called it the missing age of childhood, particularly because, well, the writing on this, you find little sections in some textbooks and the like that are devoted to middle childhood. I also call it middle childhood as the missing age because parents are inclined to think, well, everything's going pretty good. We're inclined to relax maybe too much. We're inclined to move through this stage very readily. You see, we're now beyond the age of the dependent stage of the toddler, the dependent age of the preschooler, and we're not yet at the independent stage of the teen years. And so right here between, we have a very important stage that we say, well, sometimes I say it like this: if the child is ever going to be good, the child will be good during these years. Now, I mentioned that already, and parents have come back pretty quick and say, wait a minute, my kid's pretty sassy. My kid at this age, you know, has a way of talking back and is a little difficult sometimes to listen the way the child should and all of that. And I say that's true. Sometimes maybe we feel a little like the mother I heard about a week ago. Someone said to her, well, how are the children doing? She said, well, it's going some better, although I still go to PTA under an assumed name. So, it's the missing age of childhood because we're inclined to skip over this age thinking basically everything is going well. But on the other hand, we say here is the time when we dare not assume too much. A lot of things are going on underneath the surface that we may be unaware of, and some of those things we want to talk about together here. And the child during this stage is a child who loves to please parents. Not that they're always seeking to please you, of course, but they basically love to please adults whom they admire, and particularly parents. They love to please teachers. They love to please club leaders and the like. So now is the time, and this is why I think the middle years are so important, now is the time that we can do a lot of preparation for the teen years. I talked about a lot of things happening underneath. Someone called it's the preparation before the storm of the teen years. And so here is the time where there can be closeness or withdrawal, depending upon our relationship to our children at this point. And it's a time before the child, you see, wants to find one's own identity during the teen years. And that's the withdrawal kind of thing. It's the time when the child wants a special closeness. In this session together, I'd like to talk about some of the last things we can do with our children. And the first one I'd like to mention is it's our last good chance to hold our children. That is, during these years, the child loves to be held, loves hugs and kisses, loves even to squeeze in, you know, when mother and father are sitting beside each other, and the child loves to squeeze in between there, loves to be close, responds, basks in the love of warmth, parental love, needs the assurance again and again of the parent's love for the child. We cannot, I think, overdo that in assuring the child, telling the child of our love. Needs also the security, you see, which parents bring in that closeness. And so someone has said the most therapeutic relationship is a loving, affectionate relationship between the parent and the child. And here is the time when the child, we say, loves to crawl up on the parent's lap. And again, I would say, if the child does not experience that closeness now, don't expect somehow later on, when they hit 13 and above, that the child will suddenly feel that great deal of closeness. But if it's true, I think then we can expect a closer relationship, although there will always be that search for independence and that separateness which comes with adolescence. I refer at times to some of my grandchildren. I hope you won't mind that too much. But the other evening, I saw my 14-year-old granddaughter, as we were sitting there in a circle visiting the family, crawl up on her dad's lap. To me, that was a meaningful experience for a teenager to do that. Some time ago, I was in Tennessee visiting their oldest son. His oldest daughter now 23, his next daughter 21. And while we were chatting there in the living room, Blossom came over, sat down beside her dad, put her arm out around her dad, and there, just in a very natural way, it seemed we saw again something of love which is deeply appreciated at that time. And so it's not punishment, we said, but it is the parent's closeness, approval, love that builds the kind of attitude and feelings in the life of the child which we want. In spite of failure, we talk of unconditional love, and particularly when the child fails, does the child need to experience love? And at 6 to 12, we say the child loves to be held, needs the closeness. I remember so well, one night I'd gone to bed, and our Joe, who's now engineer, senior engineer of prototype jet engines up with Pratt & Whitney, but Joe was a little fellow, middle childhood years, perhaps first or second grade. I'd gone to bed, and suddenly I looked out and saw Joe stand there at my doorway, and I said, "Joey, what do you want?" And he said, "I want to be with you." And I said to Joey, "Well, come and crawl in a little." And there, you know, just a few minutes, After a while, he was pattering off to his room again. That's a closeness that we cherish, and it's the last good chance, you see, in these years which pass very, very rapidly. And I try to remind my children continually how fast these years go from 6 to 12. A second thing that's awfully important for us to think about is that it's our last good chance to spend time with our children. I want you to remember this. Love is spelled T-I-M-E. Some time ago, in speaking to a PTA in Richmond, Virginia, after that session, a mother came to me and she said, I guess the thing that hit me this evening is that love is spelled T-I-M-E. I find it so easy to say, I don't have time. Get out of my way, you know, do something. I don't have time for you right now. And yet, we can't grow in love unless we have time for each other. I lived and taught there near a university campus, seminary campus for 19 years. One of the things that struck me was how the kids spend so much time together, you know. That is, if they have boyfriend, girlfriend, they sit in the library together, they walk together to the dining room, and they sit together in classes, and they walk together in campus. And then when you talk to them and say, we just don't have enough time together. And I speak to married couples about that. But I speak to you, too, as to all of us, when we think of our children. Love is spelled T-I-M-E. And time is so important. This togetherness, or time, is what, again, builds belonging, but it takes time to build belonging. I received a letter some time ago from one of our sons in which he encourages a dad and granddad at this point, where he said, I remember so many of the good times we had together. So, don't wait for the big times. Sometimes we think that, you know, we'll plan a big vacation, or we plan a big time together. You wait for those, and those will not be as meaningful as the many small times which you take, the daily kinds of little nuggets of time which you put in. In a retreat some time ago, we had a lady in that retreat who grew up in Switzerland. She said, you know, we were poor. She said, we didn't have many things. My parents worked hard. But one day, my mother took off a half a day to make me a straw doll. She said, that's the thing I remember most from my childhood. Not a big thing, you see, but a little time to do something special. One of the things I've asked parents groups across the country in parent-child retreats and the like is this question: what do you remember from your childhood? We take a little time on that, get responses back, and then I come back with the second question: how old were you when that was true or when that happened? Invariably, the thing which they mentioned is a thing that happened during middle childhood. They found out following World War II that of those children who had lost both parents in the war, that the only ones they could seem to bring back to a sense of normalcy again, who had lost both parents, were those children who remembered that they had done many things together as a family. A father shared with me some time ago that his son, I think belonged to Cub Scouts or something like this, was going on a boat trip. And the boys were to invite their dads to go along. He said, I was busy. My schedule was heavy. And so I said to my son, well, you go get a buddy, and I'll pay his way too. His son said, Dad, I don't want a buddy. I want you. He said, then I saw something important in our relationship together. And so a ball game, a hike, trip to the zoo, sleeping out together. My grandson came to me some time ago and he said, he's 8. He said, Grandpa, do you know what family night is? And I said, what's family night? Of course I knew. They have a little cabin way back at the end of their woods. He said family night is when, as a family, you go to the cabin and you play games together on Friday night, and then you sleep together in the cabin. Well, I tell my son-in-law, he'll never forget it. He'll never forget those family night kinds of experience. Wait again until the 12, 13. Who do they want to be with? Well, they want to be with a different group, pretty much. Although I want to encourage parents that still there can be many meaningful times, even at that age. But the parent who has time now with the child is a parent who will have a child who wants time with the parent later. A third, the last good chance you have to instill values in your child. That is, there will never be a better chance, let's say it that way, than middle childhood to instill your values in your child. How do they do it? Well, children love stories. And so they say, Daddy, tell me what it was like when you were a little boy. And they'll come again and again. They love to hear it again and again. Tell me what it was like when you were a little girl. You wait until they're 13 and then say to them, now when I was a little boy, and see how quick you shut up, you know. But up until that time, they love to hear our stories. They love to hear what it was like when we were young. They love to hear those things which were important to us. So, tell your story again and again. It's God's way, I'm persuaded, of imparting our values to our children. So that by the age of 13, we're told the average child has asked 500,000 questions. Now, some parents, when they hear that, they say, is that all? Because it seems they're asking questions all the time. But God has given us those questions, 500,000 of them, so that we have an opportunity to impart something about the meaning of life to those children. You see, those are all what, why, how questions that if we use them rightly can take us right to the feet of God itself. And so how do we impart our values? Well, not simply by lecture. Lectures don't necessarily do it, but by stories out of our own experience. And I can't stress it enough, the value of that conversation that happens around the table. I deplore the fact that many families don't know enough of what sitting around the table for a meal is today. Recently, Reader's Digest had an article, if I remember it correctly, it said, the most important hour of the day. So I was interested in reading that, and what it discussed was the supper hour, the dinner hour in the evening, and said the family that takes the time to sit around the table and discuss the happenings of the day, where children can share what has happened in school today, where parents can share something of their own lives, said that is the most important hour of the day. Here's where I think I learned a lot of the facts and beliefs of my parents. My parents never gave very many instructions. My parents never said, you know, what time did you get in last night? I don't ever remember them asking me that. My parents never said, do this so much, but I knew exactly what they believed. That is, it was part of our conversation when we were together. The way they talked about things that happened in the community. I picked up some of the values. The way they talked about other people, about the church, and all these things left a deep impression upon me. And I remember what my parents said about people particularly. Certain names even, as I've thought about it, have a special tinge of reflection or whatever you might call it, and sort of chills go up my spine today when certain names are mentioned because of the way my parents spoke about those persons when I was growing up. They say there are two primary reasons why young people leave the church. One is that they hear criticism of the church in the home, and the other is, and I like to talk to pastors about this, the other is that they are not used in the church. in a church where these kinds of this age people are used, maybe in taking the offering, in sharing in special programs in the church, those children will likely also stick in the life of the church and consider the church very important. So, talking about situations, about happenings. In Deuteronomy 6, in that great Shema passage, you remember that? Where we have tremendous psychology as well as theology outlined. It says, these words shall be first in your own heart, as parents. Then you shall teach them diligently unto your children. And if I understand the Hebrew word there, it's the word that's used of surgery. That is, you apply the knife where the need is. And you see, every child has different needs. No two children grew up in the same home. Every child is different. The home is continually changing, you see. And so you apply the teaching, in other words, where the need is, and that means apply it diligently unto the child. Well, that's awfully important in imparting our values. Then it goes on to say that that must be constant. That is, when you rise up in the morning, when you sit down, if we sit down together, when you walk by the way. I love that one, you know. My wife Betty recalls continually, if we walk down through the woods, she's saying things like this. You know, when we used to walk together when I was a girl, my father would say this, or he'd pick out this plant along the way, or he'd tell me what kind of tree this was. She still says those things, just like she remembers them back there. And so it says, when you walk by the way. A child is all the time saying things like, what makes stars step in the sky? What makes some stones smooth and other stones sharp, you see? All these questions, again, which take you where? To the feet of God, to tell something of what you believe, something about your values. And so when we say, and then it goes on to say, by the way, and when you go to bed at night, you see, one of the most vulnerable times in imparting our values to our children. And when I wrote this little book, I had a phrase in there that the editor said, where in the world did you get this statement? And I said, where do you get things? You learn them along the way. And I said something like this: God seems to have placed a hesitancy in the life of the small child to go to bed. You know what that means? So that we as parents can be especially close to the child at that very moment, or those vulnerable times when the child is more open to confess wrongs of the day, you know, where the child is more open to receive that which we have to share. These are awfully important times in the life of the child, and they'll soon be over, you see. Number 4, it's the last good chance to read to your children. Reading is at an all-time high in middle childhood. And particularly if you read to your child up until that time, the child now loves to read. One of my first grader grandchildren came to me some time ago, and she said she wanted to show me her book, which she made in school today. On the outside, it said, I love books. And then page after page, in first grader language, she told me why she loves books, and she had pictures of books drawn in there and the like. Well, it's our last good chance to read to our children. They love to read, but to read to our children. I said they love to snuggle close. That's true. It's the chance to read worthy books, you see, that build our values. Books, and they love biographies. They love autobiographies, you see, during this time. Heroes. And if we don't provide them again, who does provide them? Well, TV, the movies, they will find their heroes in the neighborhood. If we don't provide the heroes of courage and honor, they will be found. I've found out, by the way, that many persons whom we say become missionaries even to other countries have gotten their primary reference or their primary initial interest in missions back there in middle childhood years, maybe through some biography, through someone who shared perhaps in the church. So the right kind of books are awfully important. The right kind of magazines are awfully important to read and discuss together. I recently viewed with some of my grandchildren and our families together the film Prince of Egypt. It was interesting during that film that every now and then one of the little ones would turn to me and say, "Grandpa, is that true?" They were trying to compare it, whether that's true according to the Bible. Well, I tried to share them that Hollywood has a way of mixing a lot of stuff in there that isn't necessarily in the Bible. I said to my daughter later, now would be an excellent time to sit down and read the story in the Scripture and let them compare what is true and what isn't. Well, it's a good time, Father, to not only read stories of morality, but also to discuss morality with our children. It's particularly important to read stories that have emotional warmth. The child, I think, particularly is drawn to such. Stories that have caring, love, compassion. Here, I think, again, is where teachers can have such a tremendous impact upon our middle-aged child. It's good, I say, to share at the bedtime situation the stories which we're told that children get up pretty much the way we send them to bed. Now, adults do too, I think. But if that is true, then this time is awfully important in the life of the child. The next one I'd like to share is that one of our last chances is that in this great time of feeling, it's good to, very crucial in the development of the child's inner life. Unless good feelings accompany what we're doing becomes sort of negligible. It doesn't have very much meaning. And so the religious, the ethical, the guidance in relationships. I am persuaded, for instance, that the dating standards which a child will follow in the teen years are set before the teen years. Let me give you only one example of that. Some time ago, a family sat down with their daughter in the middle childhood years, and in their conversation together regarding the future, they said they would hope that she wouldn't date before she's at least 16. Well, time went on. And one day when this girl was 15, she was approached by a young fellow who asked her out for a date. And she turned him down flat. And the mother, a little later talking to her daughter, said, "You know, that was a pretty nice fella." And she responded by saying, "Well, you wouldn't want us to drop our standards, would you?" The standards, you see, were picked up back there before, and I'm persuaded that it's true of many of the standards, not as we give them so much in lecture form, but as we converse our daily belief, our daily relationships. And so you remember feelings, you remember happenings and emotions around things that are going on, even more than the happenings many times themselves. That's why it's so important to how we speak and how we, the spirit by which we convey what we believe, because someone said the middle childhood person has the memory of an elephant. So we better keep your word, you know, when you make a promise. They'll hold you to it and say, "But you promised this." And that's awfully important. The next one. It's our last good chance to teach the facts of sex. The way I say it to parents time and again is this: all the facts of sex should be shared before the child hits 12, 13. When emotions entered into the whole thing. When the parents get red in the face. And the child becomes very nervous, you see. Up until about 12 years of age, the child can hear, understand all the facts of sex, and as my doctor brother-in-law says, there really aren't that many facts. But you can hear all of those and can feel very close to the parent, you see, who has shared those intimate kind of things and can hear all the crazy stories out there in the shower rooms, the bathrooms, and on the school ground, and can say, I know better than that. My parents told me. That child enters, you see, the teen years again with a security which you want the child to have and can face those kinds of questions. So it's a good time to talk to your child about all those facts. One of our granddaughters, still in this age group, wears what she calls her chastity ring. That's a pretty good daily reminder. She calls it her chastity ring. Well, another granddaughter, some time ago, at 9 years of age, her mother found on her bureau a little booklet called Sex is More Than Fun. Have you seen it? And Rose said, Ginger, where did you find this little booklet? And she said, well, I was over at Grandpa's study. And she said, I found it lying on the desk. And she said, I wrote down the address and I sent in $1. Well, that led to a very interesting conversation, I understand, on the part of Ginger and her mother. Let me tell you a rather amusing other story. A father, some years ago, sat down with his middle-aged daughter and in very casual, open way, shared with her what we call the facts of sex. And then he ended by saying, here is a dime. Now, it'll be much more today. I'm going to give you a dime, and you take this dime with you, and it could be, very well be, that sometime or another, someone will approach you to engage in sex. You go to the nearest telephone and call me, and I'll be there. Well, the years went by. And one day this daughter was married. And that first night on the honeymoon, her dad received a call. And she said, I made a promise to call you back there. Dad, everything's going well. Thanks a lot. Well, can you imagine what a little dime taught that girl all those years? A very concrete little thing was teaching that girl year after year of her life. So, the child, I say, feels especially close to a parent who will share these facts. And as the parent is open on this kind of thing during middle childhood years, and it seems as though I'm repeating that kind of thing again and again, but that's what I think I must do, then the child, I believe, will be more open during the later years in talking freely. The next one is a very important one. It's our last good time to spend time with our children and to discuss vocations in particular. That is, it's clear that many influences are powerful in the life of the child very early when it comes to vocation. I mentioned missionaries often having caught their vision very early. In a Lutheran study, which was made some years ago, in which they asked their Lutheran ministers, at what age were you when you felt your first call to the ministry? Approximately half of all their ministers replied that it was around the age of 11 when they felt their first call to the ministry. To me, that was a significant thing to notice. And so, to take your child to the high school maybe you want them to attend, take them to the college maybe, which could be considered, take them to places that you think will be important in their life, to talk about them, to have them meet persons that are worthy of occupation, see, that have worthy occupations. Since it's the great admiration stage, they want to be like certain persons, and to bring them to those persons, to introduce them to such, will have a great impact. That, to my mind, is an important segment in the life of the middle-aged child, because these are many things which we do for the last time.